Hi there, Matt Phifer and Giancarlo Rulli from Orange State here at Liner Rink on the campus of Cornell University, where tonight Ron Paul became the first GOP candidate to make a stop in central New York just a few days before the New York primary. And Giancarlo, he got quite a reception here.
He did, and it was a very important visit, Matt, because they're really the first candidate to visit upstate New York. And as we mentioned earlier, this was really, he had a decision to make whether he wanted to come to Cornell or Syracuse. He chose Cornell, and it was really to his benefit from what we saw here today. I mean, he had a very impassionate crowd, and the entire rink itself, there really wasn't an empty seat in the house. Very vocal, and on the main points that we're so used to him talking about, which we'll get into here in a minute, they were, the crowd itself was very receptive to his point of view.
Extremely receptive, and it's funny because you look at the crowd and it's hard to imagine that he didn't win a single state when you see a crowd as energized as this, and mostly young people, which is important to mention for a candidate who's 76 years old. Very impressive.
Great
to
appeal.
see how he can appeal to young people. But let's talk a little bit about those issues that he mentioned. Liberty was something that came up time and time and time again in the speech. It took just about an hour. What were your thoughts on what he was saying?
Well, I think really the points that Congressman Paul was really driving home was, in the last 8 years especially, and you could even push it now to the last 12, under President Bush and President Obama, some of the main laws that have been passed, whether it be the Patriot Act, whether it be the National Defense Authorization Act, they have really withdrawn a lot of our, Bill of Rights freedoms that we have in our Constitution. And it was very receptive amongst the crowd. The congressman was very animated about it, but very sincere in the fact that when he spoke, he talked about, I never will vote for something that takes away your freedoms. And I think that is what really grew to the crowd and what drove that great reception from the crowd.
It's always about liberty, the story about liberty, and why liberty is so important. It's important if you want peace, it's important if you want a sound economy, and it's also very important to understand liberty if you want to own your life and to run your own life as you see fit.
And speaking of freedoms, something very interesting that he brought up during the speech was specifically about illegal drugs.
Yes.
And the fact that there are too many people in jail in this country. I think he mentioned that 25% of the world's imprisoned people are in the United States.
And 5% of the world's population is here. So that was the statistic drawn.
Right. It was a very interesting statistic. And we actually got to talk to him afterwards, and I asked him about what he thought about what is going on in Colombia this week, where there was President Obama was actually asked if he would reduce the drug laws in this country, specifically dealing with marijuana and cocaine. Here's what he said.
Well, I would have no federal regulations. It would be treated like alcohol. And if some state said that young people shouldn't have them, then the states could write these regulations. But this is an interesting area, and sometimes I forget to mention everything I think about. But tonight, I frequently talk about why people come together, and I think on the issue of drugs and the issue of what we call states' rights. Sometimes people who believe in states' rights, they're painted as bad people, or that they have bad motivations. But in California, let's say you go up and say they have medical marijuana. Why shouldn't the states have the right to legalize marijuana? So that's generally the left that would say that. So why shouldn't the left and the right come together and defend this principle? So I would leave it up to the states. I think the president made a mistake down there. I think he made a serious mistake. I didn't get around to mentioning it tonight, but I certainly disagree with him, even though he pretended that he'd have a more open door with Cuba. I think we should be trading with Cuba. We shouldn't have sanctions. If you have sanctions on countries, you're more likely to fight with them. We've had sanctions on the Castros, for 50 years, and they're still in power. And now they're talking about more sanctions on other countries. And they say to those of us who believe that we shouldn't have sanctions, they call us protectionists. But they're the ones who are the protectionists. We don't want sanctions. We want trade. We want to get along. I mean, once we started trading with China, still a lot of problems there, but at least when I was in high school, we were killing each other. But we trade with them. There's a benefit to that.
And that was a very interesting response from the congressman, actually deregulating it at the federal level, making it like alcohol, and that's actually something that he brought up. He talked about when alcohol was illegal in this country for a number of years, the prohibition. And I thought it was a very interesting connection, especially from a doctor. What do you think?
Yeah, it was, especially because he's seen both sides of it. And, you know, as a doctor, he's seen the effects of things, but I think the main point that he drove home, and something that I think we both took away, Matt, was the fact that you do to yourself, as long as you do something to yourself and it does not affect other people, he's okay with that. Now, would he advise against it? Probably yes.
Right.
But the fact that then the government, whether he mentioned Secret Service agents or SWAT going into homes and going after individual people where they're not affecting others, he believes is unconstitutional. And that, as well as with the many points that he said, really brought that great reception from the crowd, because especially to bring a local current event forward, with tomorrow being 420, that was one of the big issues as well that the crowd here at the rink was definitely noticed about, and they had in the back of their minds, and that also drew the reaction.
You know, something that was very interesting, I thought, was the fact that he didn't talk about the Federal Reserve. This is something we've heard Ron Paul talk about.
And the end of Fed
throughout
chance,
his
especially.
campaign, removing the Federal Reserve, removing some of the departments. He did mention
He wrote
departments.
a book about it as well.
He talked about the Secret Service in light of the recent scandal. But he didn't mention the Federal Reserve, so we asked him about that afterwards, and here's what Dr. Paul had to say.
For it, and the government's responsible for minting gold and silver coins, not printing money, and their guarantee is to maintain the value of the currency, not to undermine it.
And not a surprising response. It was interesting to hear actually how it would be done, because I felt that throughout the campaign we had heard that this was the plan, but we didn't know exactly how. So I was really glad to actually hear how that would be done.
And it was very important, because I think you bring up a great point, Matt. That question has been asked, but in the interviews that really the congressman has had to, you know, even major networks, he's never really specifically answered that question. He has not gone into the specific detail. He's kind of skirted around it. He said, well, it could be kind of a tough road to go down. This is one of the first times I've actually heard him lay out specific guidelines as to this is how we go about tactfully going after the Fed and trying to bring it to a close down the line. And one of the other big...
And he also mentioned it wouldn't be done in the first day.
No.
And I thought that was something that was interesting to be said, because remember, oftentimes during the debates we heard, maybe not necessarily Ron Paul, but other candidates saying, on my first day in office, I would fill in the blank.
Right.
And I think most people know that things like that cannot be done in a single day. And he said that this would be a slower process. He actually used Mexico as an example of kind of the direction that the United States might go toward, and getting rid of paper currency.
Yes.
Going toward a coin, money, rather.
Right, and clearly, and he brought up that point as well with the paper currency, that, you know, since 1913, the dollar is at 2%, is worth 2 cents, to the dollar that it was back in 1913. It just goes to show for the people out there how much the dollar has dropped, and that's a point that he's especially trying to drive home, is with the sound economic dollar, with, you know, whether it's behind a gold standard or some kind of mineral that you can back it up with, whether it be silver, whether it be gold, that we would not be in this economic rut if the dollar was not just taken as the monetary thing that it is around the world. And he also brought up the big fact that some countries now may not be using it, especially the International Monetary Fund. The dollar may not become the standard international currency that it is, and if that happens, that could be a big, big effect on the U.S. economy down the road, Matt.
Yes, and the world economy.
That as well.
And finally, again, it came down to liberty. It was the biggest key, I think, in this whole speech tonight, and that's really what he talked about.
They undermine our Fourth Amendment, and they destroy our privacy. So what we need to do is reverse that trend, whether it's the foreign policy, the personal liberties, or the economic liberties. We've been going in the wrong direction for a long time.
But for any more on this, you can keep snooping around Z89online.com, and thank you for watching. And remember, listen to Orange State Fridays at noon right here on Z89. I'm Matt Phifer along with Giancarlo Rulli on the campus of Cornell University. Thanks for watching.